Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that a Western Australian applicant for Category H firearm license has declared a history of domestic disputes in their application, stating they are now resolved, and that the firearm is solely for a legitimate sporting purpose. Which of the following approaches best upholds the requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and ensures public safety? Option A. Granting the license based on the stated sporting purpose, but imposing a condition that the firearm must be stored at a licensed club, regardless of the applicant's personal circumstances. Option B. Immediately refusing the license application based on the disclosure of past domestic disputes, without further investigation. Option C. Requesting further documentation regarding the nature and resolution of the domestic disputes, and conducting a background check to assess the applicant's current stability and risk profile before making a decision. Option D. Accepting the applicant's assurance that the disputes are resolved and the firearm will be used for the stated sporting purpose, and proceeding to grant the license. Correct answer is C. Requesting further documentation regarding the nature and resolution of the domestic disputes, and conducting a background check to assess the applicant's current stability and risk profile before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent safety and suitability requirements mandated by Western Australian firearm licensing laws. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if resolved, raises significant concerns about their temperament and potential risk, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment beyond simply accepting their stated purpose. Careful judgment is required to uphold public safety while fairly assessing an individual's eligibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, which includes a detailed review of their stated genuine reason for needing a firearm, coupled with a thorough investigation into any history that might indicate a risk to themselves or others. This approach aligns with the principles of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations, which mandate that a licensing authority must be satisfied that an applicant is a fit and proper person to hold a firearm license. This includes considering any past behavior that could compromise public safety. Therefore, requesting further documentation regarding the domestic disputes and conducting a background check to assess the applicant's current stability and risk profile is the most appropriate course of action. This demonstrates due diligence and adherence to the licensing authority's duty of care. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's stated genuine reason without further investigation, despite the disclosed history of domestic disputes. This fails to meet the licensing authority's obligation under the Firearms Act 1979, WA, to thoroughly assess an applicant's suitability and potential risk. Overlooking such a history could lead to a license being granted to an individual who may pose a danger, contravening the Act's intent to ensure public safety. Another incorrect approach is to immediately refuse the license based solely on the mention of past domestic disputes without a thorough, individualized assessment. While past behavior is relevant, the law requires consideration of the circumstances, the time elapsed, and any evidence of rehabilitation or current stability. An outright refusal without due process could be seen as unfair and may not fully comply with the principles of natural justice, which are implicitly expected in administrative decision-making. A further incorrect approach is to grant the license based on the applicant's assurance that the disputes are resolved, and that the firearm will be used solely for the stated genuine reason, without independently verifying this information or assessing the applicant's current risk. This approach prioritizes the applicant's word over the licensing authority's responsibility to ensure public safety, potentially creating a significant risk if the applicant's assurances are not well-founded or if their circumstances change. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based, evidence-driven decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the legislative framework Firearms Act 1979, WA and regulations, and its objectives, particularly regarding public safety and applicant suitability. 2. Conducting a thorough and objective assessment of all information provided by the applicant, including any disclosures of past issues. 3. Proactively seeking further information or conducting background checks where disclosures raise potential concerns about suitability or risk. 4. applying a consistent and fair evaluation process that considers all relevant factors, balancing the applicant's rights with the public's safety. 5. Documenting the decision-making process meticulously, justifying the outcome based on the evidence and legislative requirements. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal that a Western Australian applicant for Category H firearm license has disclosed a history of domestic disputes in their application, though they state these have been resolved and are not relevant to their current need for a firearm for sport shooting. Which approach best upholds the requirements of the Firearms Act 1979 (WA) and ensures public safety? Option A. Immediately reject the license application due to the mention of domestic disputes, as this automatically disqualifies an applicant under Western Australian firearm law. Option B. Accept the applicant's statement that the disputes are resolved and not relevant, and proceed with the license application based on their stated genuine reason for sport shooting. Option C. Rely solely on the applicant's self-assessment of being a responsible person and their stated genuine reason, without further investigation into their background history. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, verifying the nature and resolution of the domestic disputes, and evaluating the applicant's overall suitability as a fit and proper person based on all available information and legislative criteria. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, verifying the nature and resolution of the domestic disputes, and evaluating the applicant's overall suitability as a fit and proper person based on all available information and legislative criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent safety and suitability requirements mandated by Western Australian firearm licensing legislation. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if resolved, raises significant concerns regarding their temperament and potential risk, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment beyond simply accepting their stated purpose. Failure to adequately investigate these concerns could compromise public safety and violate the licensing authority's duty to ensure firearms are only issued to responsible individuals. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes public safety and adheres strictly to the requirements of the Firearms Act 1979 (WA) and its associated regulations. This approach necessitates a thorough investigation into the applicant's background, including verifying the nature and resolution of the domestic disputes. It requires obtaining and reviewing relevant documentation, potentially interviewing individuals involved with appropriate consent and legal considerations, and assessing the applicant's overall suitability based on the criteria outlined in the Act, such as demonstrating a genuine reason for possessing a firearm and being a fit and proper person. This aligns with the licensing authority's obligation to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of individuals who may pose a risk. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's stated reason for needing a firearm without independent verification or further investigation into their background. This fails to meet the licensing authority's duty to conduct due diligence and assess the applicant's suitability as a fit and proper person, as required by the Firearms Act 1979 (WA). The existence of past domestic disputes, regardless of their current status, warrants scrutiny to ensure the applicant's temperament and judgment are appropriate for firearm ownership. Another incorrect approach is to immediately reject the application solely based on the mention of past domestic disputes without a proper assessment of the circumstances, their resolution, or the applicant's current character. While past issues are relevant, a blanket rejection without due process can be unfair and may not align with the legislative intent, which allows for discretion based on a holistic assessment of the applicant's suitability. The Act requires a balanced consideration of all relevant factors. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the applicant's self-declaration of being a responsible person without corroborating evidence or independent checks. This bypasses the essential investigative steps required by the licensing authority to confirm the applicant's suitability, and could lead to a license being granted to someone who may not be a fit and proper person, thereby undermining public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves understanding the specific legislative requirements of Western Australia regarding firearm licensing, particularly the criteria for a fit and proper person, and the need for a genuine reason. When an applicant's background presents potential red flags, such as past domestic disputes, the professional's duty is to conduct a thorough, objective, and documented investigation. This investigation should aim to gather sufficient information to make an informed decision that upholds both public safety and procedural fairness. The decision-making process should be guided by the principle of risk mitigation, ensuring that firearms are only accessible to individuals who have demonstrated a clear and consistent ability to handle them responsibly and safely. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a Western Australian applicant for Category H firearm license has disclosed past domestic disputes, though they assert these have been resolved and do not result in any current criminal convictions. Which approach best upholds the principles of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and ensures public safety? Option A. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the past domestic disputes, seeking further information from the applicant and relevant authorities, and assess the applicant's overall suitability as a fit and proper person to possess a firearm, considering this history alongside other factors. Option B. Deny the license immediately due to the presence of any documented domestic disputes in the applicant's history, as this automatically disqualifies them from being a fit and proper person. Option C. Grant the license if the applicant's stated purpose for the firearm is for a legitimate sporting activity, as this demonstrates a responsible intent that outweighs past personal conflicts. Option D. Approve the license based on the applicant's assurance that the disputes are resolved and that they have no current criminal convictions, as the law primarily focuses on current legal standing. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the past domestic disputes, seeking further information from the applicant and relevant authorities, and assess the applicant's overall suitability as a fit and proper person to possess a firearm, considering this history alongside other factors. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent safety and suitability requirements mandated by Western Australian firearm licensing laws. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if resolved, raises significant concerns about their temperament and potential risk to themselves or others, which directly impacts their suitability for a Category H license. Careful judgment is required to avoid both undue denial of a legitimate right and, more importantly, compromising public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's overall suitability, giving significant weight to any documented history of domestic disputes. This approach aligns with the principles of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations, which require the licensing authority to be satisfied that an applicant is a fit and proper person to possess a firearm. The presence of domestic disputes, regardless of their resolution, suggests a potential for impulsive behavior or conflict escalation, which is a direct contravention of the fit and proper person test. The licensing authority must investigate these matters thoroughly, potentially requesting further information from the applicant and relevant authorities before making a determination. This ensures that public safety is prioritized while adhering to the legal framework. Incorrect approach is analysis. Approving the license solely based on the applicant's assertion that the disputes were resolved and that they have no current criminal conviction fails to adequately address the underlying concerns about their temperament and propensity for conflict. This approach overlooks the spirit of the law, which aims to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of individuals who may pose a risk, even if that risk is not currently evidenced by a criminal conviction. It neglects the licensing authority's duty to proactively assess suitability beyond superficial checks. Denying the license outright solely because of the past domestic disputes, without a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's current circumstances, character, and the nature of the disputes, could be considered an arbitrary decision. While the disputes are a serious red flag, the law generally requires a holistic evaluation. A blanket denial without due consideration of mitigating factors or evidence of rehabilitation could be challenged as unfair. Focusing exclusively on the applicant's stated purpose for the license, e.g., sports shooting, without adequately investigating the potential risks associated with their personal history, is also professionally unacceptable. The stated purpose is a factor, but it does not override the fundamental requirement to assess the applicant's overall suitability and potential risk to public safety. The licensing authority's primary responsibility is safety, not facilitating firearm ownership for any stated purpose if the applicant's history suggests a risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing public safety above all else. This involves a diligent and objective investigation of all relevant information, particularly concerning an applicant's history that might indicate a propensity for violence or conflict. The decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging and thoroughly investigating any red flags, such as domestic disputes. 2. Seeking all available information from the applicant and relevant agencies. 3. Applying the fit and proper person test rigorously, considering both past behavior and current circumstances. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for approval or refusal, to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 4. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Western Australian Police Force firearm licensing officer when assessing an applicant for a Category H firearm license who states their genuine reason is for sport shooting, but has a documented history of domestic disputes, even though they claim these disputes are resolved? Option A. Accept the applicant's stated reason for sport shooting and their assurance that past domestic disputes are resolved, and proceed with issuing the license without further investigation into the disputes. Option B. Focus solely on the applicant's stated genuine reason for sport shooting, disregarding the history of domestic disputes as irrelevant to the licensing process. Option C. Grant the license based on the applicant's enthusiasm for sport shooting, assuming that resolved disputes do not impact their current suitability for firearm ownership. Option D. Conduct a thorough background check. Independently verify the stated genuine reason for sport shooting, and investigate the nature and circumstances of the past domestic disputes to assess the applicant's overall suitability and risk profile. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough background check, independently verify the stated genuine reason for sport shooting, and investigate the nature and circumstances of the past domestic disputes to assess the applicant's overall suitability and risk profile. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent safety and suitability requirements mandated by Western Australian firearm licensing legislation. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if resolved, raises significant concerns about their temperament and potential risk, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment beyond simply accepting their stated purpose. The licensing authority has a dual responsibility to facilitate lawful firearm ownership for eligible individuals and, critically, to protect public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, which includes a thorough review of their stated genuine reason for needing a firearm, corroboration of this reason, and a detailed investigation into their personal history, particularly any instances of conflict or violence. This aligns with the principles of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations, which require applicants to demonstrate a genuine reason for possessing a firearm and to be deemed a fit and proper person. The licensing authority must actively seek information that might indicate a risk, rather than passively accepting the applicant's assertions. This includes investigating past disputes to understand the context and potential for future issues, and potentially requiring additional evidence or interviews. Incorrect approaches analysis. Accepting the applicant's stated reason without independent verification and a thorough background check is a significant regulatory failure. It bypasses the due diligence required by the Firearms Act 1979, WA, to ensure the applicant is not a risk to themselves or others. This approach prioritizes convenience over public safety and the integrity of the licensing system, focusing solely on the applicant's assurance that the disputes are resolved without investigating the nature and circumstances of those disputes is also a failure. The legislation requires an assessment of the applicant's character and propensity for violence or misuse of a firearm. Ignoring past conflicts, even if officially settled, means a critical aspect of suitability assessment is neglected, potentially overlooking underlying issues. Granting the license based on the applicant's perceived enthusiasm for sport shooting, without adequately investigating the domestic disputes or independently verifying the genuine reason, demonstrates a lack of due diligence. While sport shooting can be a genuine reason, it does not negate the requirement for a comprehensive background check and assessment of overall suitability, especially when concerning information like past disputes is known. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearm licensing must adopt a risk-based approach. This involves proactively identifying potential risks associated with an applicant, rather than waiting for them to be explicitly presented. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the legislative framework and its intent, public safety, and lawful ownership. 2. Gathering all relevant information, including stated reasons, background checks, and any reported incidents. 3. Objectively evaluating the gathered information against the criteria for a fit and proper person and a genuine reason. 4. Seeking further information or clarification where doubts exist. 5. Making a decision that prioritizes public safety while adhering to the law. Question 5. Investigation of a Category H firearm license application in Western Australia reveals that the applicant has stated their genuine reason as sporting purposes, but has provided no supporting documentation or detailed explanation beyond this brief statement. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to ensure their application is processed effectively and in compliance with Western Australian firearm licensing requirements? Option A. Advise the licensing authority that their personal convenience and desire to participate in shooting sports are sufficient justification for the license. Option B. Submit a comprehensive application package that includes a detailed written explanation of their specific sporting activities, membership proof of a relevant shooting club, and any other documentation that substantiates their genuine reason for needing a firearm for sport. Option C. Provide a letter from a friend stating they have seen the applicant shoot on occasion, without formal club affiliation or specific details of the sport. Option D. Request an exemption from providing detailed evidence, arguing that the term sporting purposes is self-explanatory and should be accepted at face value. The correct answer is B. Submit a comprehensive application package that includes a detailed written explanation of their specific sporting activities, membership proof of a relevant shooting club, and any other documentation that substantiates their genuine reason for needing a firearm for sport. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only a genuine need for a firearm, but also to navigate the complex legal and ethical considerations surrounding firearm ownership in Western Australia. The onus is on the applicant to prove they meet the stringent criteria, and the licensing authority must balance public safety with individual rights. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting information can have severe consequences, including license refusal, legal penalties, and a permanent mark on the applicant's record. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves the applicant proactively and transparently providing all requested documentation and information, including a detailed explanation of their genuine reason for needing a firearm, supported by evidence. This aligns with the principles of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and associated regulations, which mandate that applicants must satisfy the Commissioner of Police of their genuine reason and suitability. Honesty, completeness, and a clear demonstration of adherence to legal requirements are paramount. This approach ensures the applicant is presenting a comprehensive and truthful case, allowing the licensing authority to make an informed decision based on established legal criteria. Incorrect approach is analysis. Providing only a vague statement of intent without supporting evidence fails to meet the genuine reason requirement stipulated by the Firearms Act 1979. WA. The Act requires a demonstrable and legitimate purpose, not merely a desire. This approach risks immediate refusal due to insufficient justification. Submitting incomplete or misleading documentation, such as omitting relevant details about past incidents or misrepresenting the nature of the intended use, constitutes a failure to comply with the honesty and integrity expected of license applicants. This can lead to license refusal and potential prosecution under the Act for providing false or misleading information. Focusing solely on personal convenience or perceived rights without addressing the specific legal requirements for a genuine reason demonstrates a misunderstanding of the licensing process. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, prioritizes public safety and requires a clearly defined and lawful purpose for firearm possession, which personal convenience alone does not satisfy. Professional reasoning, Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand the specific legislative requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and relevant regulations. Second, meticulously gather all required documentation and evidence to support the stated genuine reason. Third, ensure all information provided is accurate, complete, and truthful. Fourth, be prepared to clearly articulate the genuine reason and address any potential concerns the licensing authority might have. This structured approach minimizes risk and maximizes the likelihood of a successful and lawful outcome. Question 6. Assessment of a firearm dealer's professional conduct in Western Australia when a prospective buyer presents a license for a Category H firearm, but the dealer suspects the license may be expired or for a different firearm category. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with the Firearms Act 1979 WA? Option A. Proceed with the sale, but make a note to check the license status at a later date. Option B. Accept the buyer's verbal assurance that their license is valid and appropriate for the intended firearm purchase. Option C. Immediately verify the validity and category of the buyer's Category H firearm license with the issuing authority before proceeding with any sale. Option D. Accept a photocopy of the buyer's license as sufficient proof of authorization for the firearm purchase. The correct answer is C. Immediately verify the validity and category of the buyer's Category H firearm license with the issuing authority before proceeding with any sale. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm dealer in Western Australia due to the strict regulatory environment surrounding firearm licensing and sales. The core challenge lies in balancing the business imperative to make sales with the absolute legal and ethical obligation to ensure all transactions comply with the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations. Misinterpreting or overlooking requirements can lead to severe penalties, including license suspension or cancellation, and potential criminal charges. The dealer must exercise due diligence and a thorough understanding of the licensing process to avoid facilitating an illegal firearm acquisition. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying the validity and suitability of the prospective buyer's firearm license before proceeding with any sale. This means actively checking the license details against the proposed firearm purchase, ensuring the license category, Category H for handguns, permits the specific type of firearm being considered, and confirming the license is current and unencumbered. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, mandates that a dealer must not sell a firearm unless the buyer produces a valid license authorizing the acquisition of that specific firearm. This proactive verification process directly upholds the legislative intent to control firearm ownership and prevent their transfer to unauthorized individuals. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the sale based solely on the buyer's verbal assurance of possessing a license, or accepting a photocopy of a license without independent verification, represents a significant regulatory failure. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, requires the production of an original, valid license. Relying on a verbal statement or a copy bypasses the essential due diligence required by law and could inadvertently lead to the sale of a firearm to someone who is not legally permitted to possess it, or who is not licensed for that particular firearm type. Accepting a license that is expired or for a different category of firearm, e.g., a Category O or B license for a handgun, is also a direct contravention of the Act. The dealer has a responsibility to ensure the license specifically authorizes the acquisition of a Category H firearm. Failure to do so exposes the dealer to liability and undermines the integrity of the licensing system. Delaying the verification process until after the sale has been provisionally agreed upon, with the intention of checking the license later, is also professionally unacceptable. The legal obligation to verify the license exists before the sale is finalized. Post-sale verification does not absolve the dealer of the responsibility to ensure compliance at the point of transaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-averse and compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should be guided by the principle of innocent until proven guilty for the buyer, but strictly compliant until verified for the transaction. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and relevant regulations. 2. Implementing robust internal procedures for license verification that include checking for validity, category appropriateness, and currency. 3. Prioritizing legal compliance over immediate sales revenue. 4. Seeking clarification from the relevant authorities, e.g., WA Police Firearms Division, if any doubt arises regarding a license or transaction. 5. Maintaining detailed records of all transactions and verification processes. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal that a firearms registry in Western Australia is reviewing an application for a Category H firearm license. The applicant has declared a past incident involving a physical altercation several years ago, which they state was a minor scuffle and resulted in no charges. The registry officer must decide how to proceed with assessing this application. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and professional responsibilities for firearms licensing in Western Australia? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's declared history, cross-referencing with any available official records, and assess their current suitability to hold a Category H license based on the specific criteria in the Firearms Act 1979. Including the fit and proper person test before making a determination. Option B. Grant the license immediately, assuming the applicant's self-declaration of a minor incident is sufficient and that past events do not impact current suitability. Option C. Automatically deny the license application due to the mention of a physical altercation, regardless of the details or outcome, as any history of violence is grounds for disqualification. Option D. Seek informal opinions from local law enforcement officers about the applicant's general character, without formal verification or consideration of the specific licensing criteria. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's declared history, cross-referencing with any available official records, and assess their current suitability to hold a Category H license based on the specific criteria in the Firearms Act 1979. Including the fit and proper person test before making a determination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firearms registry to balance the public interest in firearm safety and community well-being with the rights of individuals to possess firearms under Western Australian law. The applicant's history presents a potential risk, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment that adheres strictly to the legislative framework governing firearm licensing. Failure to do so could result in either an unsafe individual obtaining a firearm or an unjustified denial of a license, leading to legal challenges and reputational damage for the registry. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of all provided documentation, including the applicant's self-declared history and any supporting evidence, against the specific criteria outlined in the Firearms Act 1979, and its associated regulations. This includes a detailed assessment of whether the applicant meets the genuine reason requirement and whether they are a fit and proper person to possess a firearm, considering any past conduct that might indicate a risk to themselves or others. The registry must then make a decision based on the objective evidence and the legislative requirements, documenting the entire process meticulously. This approach ensures compliance with the law, promotes public safety, and upholds procedural fairness for the applicant. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the license based solely on the applicant's mention of past involvement in a brawl, without conducting a thorough investigation into the circumstances, the outcome of any legal proceedings, and the time elapsed since the incident. This fails to assess the applicant as an individual and their current suitability, potentially violating principles of natural justice and the specific provisions of the Firearms Act 1979, that require consideration of the totality of circumstances. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license without further inquiry, assuming the applicant's self-declaration is sufficient and that past issues are irrelevant. This neglects the registry's duty of care to the public and its obligation under the Firearms Act 1979, to ensure that only suitable individuals are licensed. The registry must actively assess risk, not passively accept information. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on anecdotal information or hearsay from external sources without verifying its accuracy or relevance to the licensing criteria. This introduces an element of bias and unreliability into the decision-making process, which is contrary to the objective standards required by the legislation and could lead to an unlawful decision. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must clearly identify the relevant legislative framework, Firearms Act 1979, law and regulations. Second, they must gather all available and relevant information, both from the applicant and through necessary checks. Third, they must objectively assess this information against the statutory criteria for licensing, paying particular attention to the fit and proper person test and the genuine reason requirement. Fourth, they must document their findings and the rationale for their decision thoroughly. Finally, they must communicate the decision and the reasons for it to the applicant in accordance with procedural fairness requirements. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the secure storage of Category H firearms at a licensed dealer's premises in Western Australia. Considering the Firearms Act 1979, WA, which of the following approaches best mitigates this risk while adhering to regulatory requirements? Option A. Relying on a standard commercial lock on a display cabinet for Category H firearms, assuming it deters casual theft. Option B. Allowing potential customers to handle unloaded Category H firearms under minimal supervision to facilitate sales. Option C. Implementing a multi-layered security system including a purpose-built, bolted firearm safe compliant with Australian standards for Category H firearms, coupled with strict protocols for handling and verifying licenses and regular security audits. Option D. Installing a basic alarm system and conducting security checks only when a new firearm is acquired. The correct answer is C. Implementing a multi-layered security system including a purpose-built, bolted firearm safe compliant with Australian standards for Category H firearms, coupled with strict protocols for handling and verifying licenses and regular security audits. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm dealer in Western Australia due to the inherent risks associated with the storage and handling of firearms, particularly Category H licenses, which often involve handguns. The dealer must balance business operations with the stringent legal obligations and ethical responsibilities to prevent misuse or theft of firearms. Failure to adhere to these requirements can lead to severe penalties, including license suspension or cancellation, and significant legal liability. Careful judgment is required to implement and maintain security measures that meet or exceed legislative standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and comprehensive approach to security, focusing on the specific requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and associated regulations. This includes implementing a multi-layered security system that goes beyond minimum legal requirements. For Category H firearms, this means secure storage in a purpose-built, locked safe that meets Australian standards, e.g., as /NZS 3809, which is bolted to the building structure. Furthermore, it necessitates robust inventory management, regular security audits, and a clear, documented procedure for handling and displaying firearms, including ensuring that firearms are unloaded and secured when not actively being demonstrated to a licensed individual. This approach directly aligns with the legislative intent of preventing unauthorized access and diversion of firearms, thereby upholding public safety and the integrity of the licensing system in Western Australia. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on basic security measures, such as a standard commercial lock on a display cabinet, without ensuring it is a purpose-built firearm safe bolted down. This fails to meet the specific requirements for Category H firearms under Western Australian law, which mandates a higher standard of security to prevent theft and unauthorized access. The risk of a determined individual breaching such a cabinet is significantly higher, creating a direct contravention of the Act. Another incorrect approach is to allow firearms to be handled by potential customers without verifying their license status or ensuring the firearm remains under direct supervision and is unloaded. This bypasses crucial safety protocols and regulatory requirements designed to ensure that only licensed individuals handle firearms and that they are always managed in a safe condition. It creates an unacceptable risk of accidental discharge or theft. A third incorrect approach is to neglect regular security system checks and maintenance, assuming that initial compliance is sufficient. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, implies an ongoing duty of care. Security systems can degrade and vulnerabilities can emerge. Failing to conduct regular audits means potential security breaches may go undetected, leaving firearms vulnerable and failing to meet the continuous obligation to maintain a secure environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable legal and regulatory requirements specific to Western Australia and the type of license, Category H. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment of the premises and business operations, considering potential threats and vulnerabilities. 3. Implementing security measures that not only meet but ideally exceed minimum legal standards, prioritizing the prevention of unauthorized access and theft. 4. Establishing clear documented procedures for all aspects of firearm handling, storage, and sales, ensuring staff are adequately trained. 5. Regularly reviewing and auditing security systems and procedures to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. 6. Maintaining open communication with the relevant Western Australian Police Firearms Registry and reporting any security incidents promptly. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal that a Category H firearm license applicant in Western Australia has declared a genuine reason for possessing a firearm, but has also disclosed a history of domestic disputes, which have since been resolved. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and uphold public safety? Option A. Proceed with the license application based on the applicant's stated genuine reason, assuming the resolved domestic disputes do not pose a current risk. Option B. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's stated genuine reason and the circumstances surrounding the resolved domestic disputes, seeking corroborating evidence and assessing current suitability to possess a firearm. Option C. Automatically reject the license application due to the applicant's history of domestic disputes, regardless of their resolution. Option D. Assign the assessment of the domestic dispute history to an administrative assistant without specific guidance on how to evaluate its impact on the applicant's suitability. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's stated genuine reason and the circumstances surrounding the resolved domestic disputes, seeking corroborating evidence and assessing current suitability to possess a firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent safety and suitability requirements mandated by Western Australian firearm licensing laws. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if resolved, raises significant concerns about their temperament and potential risk, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment beyond simply accepting their stated purpose. Careful judgment is required to ensure public safety without unfairly penalizing an individual if they can demonstrate genuine suitability. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes public safety and adherence to the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations. This approach involves thoroughly investigating the applicant's stated genuine reason for needing a firearm, critically evaluating the information provided, and conducting a detailed background check that specifically addresses the reported domestic disputes. This includes seeking corroborating evidence, interviewing referees, and potentially requesting further information from the applicant or relevant authorities to ascertain their current suitability and risk profile. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, mandates that the licensing authority must be satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person to possess a firearm, and a history of domestic disputes is a significant factor in this determination. Ethical considerations also demand a proactive approach to risk mitigation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's stated genuine reason at face value and proceeding with the license application without further investigation into the domestic disputes. This fails to meet the fit and proper person test under the Firearms Act 1979, WA, as it neglects a critical factor that could indicate a propensity for violence or an inability to safely handle a firearm. It also breaches the ethical duty to protect public safety. Another incorrect approach is to automatically reject the application solely based on the mention of past domestic disputes, without allowing the applicant an opportunity to provide context or demonstrate that the issues are resolved and do not pose a current risk. While the disputes are a serious concern, the legislation requires an assessment of current suitability, not just past events in isolation. This approach may be overly punitive and not in line with a fair and thorough assessment process. A further incorrect approach is to delegate the entire assessment of the domestic dispute history to a junior officer without providing clear guidelines or oversight. This risks inconsistent application of the law and ethical standards, potentially leading to either an inadequate assessment of risk or an unfair denial of the license. The responsibility for ensuring a thorough and compliant assessment rests with the licensing authority. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based assessment framework. This involves 1. Identifying potential risks associated with the applicant and their stated purpose. 2. Gathering all relevant information, including background checks and applicant statements. 3. Critically evaluating the information, paying particular attention to factors that impact suitability and public safety, such as the domestic dispute history. 4. Applying the relevant legislative criteria, e.g., the fit and proper person test in Western Australia. 5. Making a decision based on a balanced consideration of the applicant's needs and the paramount importance of public safety, with a clear and justifiable rationale. Question 10. Quality control measures reveal that a firearm dealer in Western Australia has been consistently calculating the goods and services tax, GST, on firearm license fees. The total license fee charged by the Department of Justice is $500, which comprises a $400 administrative fee and a $100 government levy. If the dealer incorrectly calculated the GST on the entire $500 fee, what would be the difference in the GST collected compared to the correct calculation? Option A. The dealer would have collected $50 more in GST than required. Option B. The dealer would have collected $0 more in GST than required. Option C. The dealer would have collected $10 more in GST than required. Option D. The dealer would have collected $40 more in GST than required. The correct answer is C. The dealer would have collected $10 more in GST than required. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm dealer in Western Australia concerning the accurate calculation of goods and services tax, GST, on a firearm license fee. Miscalculating GST can lead to underpayment or overpayment, both of which have significant financial and regulatory consequences. Underpayment can result in penalties and audits by the Australian Taxation Office (ATO), while overpayment can harm the business's cash flow and customer relations. The complexity arises from understanding which components of the license fee are subject to GST and applying the correct tax rate. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves correctly identifying the taxable components of the firearm license fee and applying the standard GST rate of 10% to those components. In Western Australia, the Department of Justice, which issues firearm licenses, typically charges a fee that may include both a government levy and an administrative component. The administrative component, representing the service provided by the department, is generally subject to GST. Therefore, the dealer must ascertain the portion of the total license fee that constitutes the taxable administrative service and calculate 10% of that amount. This approach aligns with the Australian Taxation Office's guidelines on GST, ensuring compliance with the new tax system, Goods and Services Tax, Act 1999. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to apply the GST to the entire license fee without distinguishing between taxable and non-taxable components. This would result in an overcollection of GST if the fee includes non-taxable government levies or charges. This fails to comply with the new tax system, Goods and Services Tax, Act 1999, which mandates that GST is only applied to taxable supplies. Another incorrect approach is to assume the entire license fee is non-taxable and therefore not charge any GST. This would lead to underpayment of GST to the ATO, potentially resulting in penalties, interest, and an audit. This directly contravenes the principles of the new tax system, Goods and Services Tax, Act 1999, which requires GST to be charged on all taxable supplies made in Australia by a registered entity. A third incorrect approach is to apply a reduced or incorrect GST rate. The standard GST rate in Australia is 10%. Applying any other rate without specific legislative authority, which is not applicable to standard firearm license fees, would be a clear breach of tax law. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of Australian tax legislation and the GST framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, they must obtain a clear breakdown of the firearm license fee from the issuing authority in Western Australia. Second, they need to consult the Australian Taxation Office's guidelines or seek professional advice to determine which components of the fee are considered taxable supplies. Third, they should apply the standard 10% GST rate only to the identified taxable components. If there is any uncertainty, seeking clarification from the ATO or a qualified tax advisor is paramount to ensure accurate compliance and avoid penalties. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of accidental discharge if a firearm is not stored securely in Western Australia. Considering the requirements for a Category H firearm license, which of the following approaches best demonstrates the applicant's understanding of their responsibilities and commitment to safety? Option A, stating that the firearm will be kept in a locked cabinet and that the applicant is a responsible individual who has never had any safety incidents. Option B, focusing on the genuine reason for acquiring the firearm and assuming that the licensing authority will be satisfied with this justification alone. Option C, proposing to store the firearm in a secure location within the home, such as a locked drawer, and relying on personal vigilance to prevent any accidents. Option D, detailing the specific type of Australian standard compliance safe to be used, its installation method, and a protocol for daily checks of the safe's integrity, alongside a commitment to regular safe handling refresher courses. The correct answer is D, detailing the specific type of Australian standard compliance safe to be used, its installation method, and a protocol for daily checks of the safe's integrity, alongside a commitment to regular safe handling refresher courses. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the potential risks associated with firearm ownership and the specific requirements under Western Australian law for managing those risks. The challenge lies in accurately assessing and articulating these risks in a way that satisfies the licensing authority, balancing the applicant's right to own a firearm with the community's safety. The applicant must not only identify potential risks, but also propose credible and practical mitigation strategies that align with the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive and honest self-assessment of potential risks, supported by specific, actionable mitigation strategies that directly address the identified risks and comply with the Firearms Act 1979, WA. This includes acknowledging potential vulnerabilities such as unsecured storage, accidental discharge, or misuse, and detailing concrete steps like installing a compliant safe, undertaking safe handling courses, and establishing a clear protocol for transporting the firearm. This approach demonstrates a proactive commitment to responsible firearm ownership and a clear understanding of legal obligations, which is paramount for obtaining and maintaining a Category H license in Western Australia. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, mandates that applicants must satisfy the Commissioner of Police that they have a genuine reason for possessing a firearm and are a fit and proper person, which includes demonstrating an understanding of and commitment to safe storage and handling. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that downplays or omits potential risks, focusing solely on the applicant's perceived trustworthiness, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the statutory requirement to demonstrate an understanding of risk management and could be interpreted as a lack of diligence or an attempt to mislead the licensing authority. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, requires a thorough assessment of suitability, which includes an evaluation of risk. Another unacceptable approach is to propose vague or generic mitigation strategies that lack specificity or are not demonstrably effective. For example, stating, "I will be careful," without detailing how or what measures will be taken does not satisfy the requirement for concrete risk management. This demonstrates a superficial understanding of the responsibilities involved and does not provide the licensing authority with the necessary assurance of safety. Finally, an approach that relies on assumptions about the leniency of the licensing process or the minimal likelihood of incidents is also professionally flawed. This demonstrates a disregard for the serious nature of firearm licensing and the potential consequences of inadequate risk management. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, is designed to prevent harm, and any application that does not reflect this seriousness will likely be unsuccessful. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach firearm license applications with a mindset of transparency, thoroughness, and a commitment to safety. This involves undertaking a detailed risk assessment, identifying all plausible risks associated with the specific type of firearm and the applicant's circumstances, and then developing specific, practical, and legally compliant mitigation strategies. The process should be guided by the principles of responsible ownership and a clear understanding of the legislative framework, such as the Firearms Act 1979, WA, ensuring that all requirements are met proactively and honestly. Question 12. Process analysis reveals a firearm license applicant in Western Australia has provided a detailed explanation of their genuine reason for seeking a Category H license, citing participation in competitive pistol shooting. What is the most appropriate next step for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with the Firearms Act 1932, WA, and associated regulations? Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the applicant's proposed firearm safe and its installation location to verify compliance with all relevant Australian standards for firearm storage. Option B. Issue the license based on the applicant's stated genuine reason, with a note to follow up on storage arrangements at a later, unspecified time. Option C. Accept the applicant's stated genuine reason and assume they will acquire a compliant firearm safe at a later date. Option D. Rely solely on the applicant's verbal assurance that they understand the importance of firearm security and will store the firearm appropriately. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the applicant's proposed firearm safe and its installation location to verify compliance with all relevant Australian standards for firearm storage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only a genuine need for a firearm, but also the capacity to store it safely and securely, thereby mitigating potential risks to themselves and the public. The assessment process under the Firearms Act 1932, WA, and associated regulations demands a thorough and objective evaluation of the applicant's circumstances and proposed storage arrangements, balancing the applicant's rights with public safety imperatives. Failure to adequately assess these factors can lead to the inappropriate issuance of a license, with potentially severe consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's stated genuine reason for possessing a firearm, cross-referencing this with the proposed storage arrangements. This approach requires verifying the applicant's declared purpose, e.g., sport shooting, hunting, and then meticulously examining the proposed safe and its location to ensure it meets the stringent requirements of the Firearms Act 1932 WA and the relevant Australian standards for firearm storage. This includes confirming the safe's construction, locking mechanisms, and its installation in a secure location, away from potential unauthorized access. The justification for this approach lies in its direct adherence to the legislative intent of the Firearms Act 1932, WA, which mandates that licenses are only granted to individuals who can demonstrate a legitimate need and can safely and securely store the firearm. This proactive assessment minimizes the risk of diversion or misuse. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's stated genuine reason without independently verifying the proposed storage solution's compliance with regulatory standards. This fails to uphold the duty of care mandated by the Firearms Act 1932, WA, to ensure public safety. It bypasses the critical step of assessing the physical security of the firearm, potentially leading to a license being granted to someone who cannot adequately secure their weapon, thereby creating a significant public risk. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the applicant's stated genuine reason and assume that any storage solution they propose will be adequate, without conducting a site inspection or requesting detailed specifications of the proposed safe. This approach neglects the specific requirements for firearm safes and their installation as outlined in the relevant Australian standards, which are integral to the licensing process under Western Australian law. It represents a superficial assessment that prioritizes convenience over due diligence. A further incorrect approach is to approve the license based on the applicant's assurances that they will get a proper safe at a later date, without any concrete evidence or commitment to a specific compliant storage solution. This defers a critical safety requirement, undermining the immediate intent of the licensing legislation to ensure safe storage from the outset of license issuance. It creates a loophole that could allow firearms to be stored improperly for an indeterminate period. Professional reasoning. Professionals assessing firearm license applications in Western Australia must adopt a risk-based approach. This involves a systematic evaluation of the applicant's stated need, their suitability, and crucially, their capacity for secure storage. The process should involve obtaining detailed information about proposed storage, verifying compliance with the Firearms Act 1932, WA and relevant Australian standards, and where necessary, conducting site inspections. A commitment to thoroughness and a clear understanding of the legislative framework are paramount to making informed decisions that balance individual rights with community safety. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal that a Category H firearm license applicant in Western Australia, who has a history of a resolved dispute with a neighbor, has submitted an application. The applicant's submitted documentation includes a brief mention of the past dispute and a general statement about responsible firearm ownership. What is the most appropriate approach for the applicant to take to ensure their application is thoroughly assessed against the requirements of the Firearms Act 1973 WA? Option A. Provide a detailed impact statement that specifically outlines practical measures to mitigate any potential risks arising from their proposed firearm use, particularly in light of their past dispute, and demonstrates a commitment to responsible handling and conflict avoidance. Option B. Request that the licensing authority disregard the mention of the past dispute as it is no longer relevant. Option C. Submit a generalized statement about responsible firearm ownership and focus on the technical aspects of safe firearm storage. Option D. State that the past dispute was resolved and therefore has no bearing on their current suitability for a firearm license. The correct answer is A. Provide a detailed impact statement that specifically outlines practical measures to mitigate any potential risks arising from their proposed firearm use, particularly in light of their past dispute, and demonstrates a commitment to responsible handling and conflict avoidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm license applicant to demonstrate not only a genuine reason for possessing a firearm, but also to proactively address potential risks associated with their proposed use. The applicant's history of a past dispute, even if resolved, introduces a layer of complexity that necessitates careful consideration by the licensing authority. The challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply for a license with the paramount public safety obligation of the Western Australian Police Force. Thorough impact assessment is crucial to ensure that the license, if granted, will not pose an unacceptable risk. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the applicant providing a comprehensive and detailed impact statement that specifically addresses how they will mitigate any potential risks arising from their proposed firearm use, particularly in light of their past dispute. This statement should outline practical measures, such as secure storage, responsible handling protocols, and a clear plan for avoiding situations that could lead to conflict. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of the Firearms Act 1973, WA, and its associated regulations, which mandate that applicants must satisfy the Commissioner of Police that they have a genuine reason and are a fit and proper person to possess a firearm. A proactive and detailed impact assessment demonstrates foresight and a commitment to responsible firearm ownership, directly addressing the licensing authority's duty to protect public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply state that the past dispute was resolved and therefore irrelevant to the current application. This fails to acknowledge the licensing authority's obligation to consider all relevant information that might indicate a risk to public safety. Firearms Act 1973, WA, requires a thorough assessment of the applicant's suitability, and a past dispute, even if resolved, could be considered relevant to assessing their temperament and potential for future conflict. Another incorrect approach is to provide a vague and generalized statement about responsible firearm use without specific details or measures tailored to the applicant's circumstances. This lacks the depth required to satisfy the licensing authority that potential risks have been adequately considered and managed. The regulations expect a concrete demonstration of understanding and preparedness, not mere platitudes. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the technical aspects of firearm ownership, such as safe storage, while neglecting to address the interpersonal or behavioral aspects that might be relevant given the applicant's history. The assessment must be holistic, considering both the physical security of the firearm and the applicant's capacity to use it safely and responsibly in all circumstances. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based approach. This involves identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and severity, and developing strategies to mitigate them. When dealing with applications where past issues might be relevant, it is crucial to encourage applicants to be transparent and proactive in addressing these concerns. The decision-making process should be guided by the legislation's intent to allow lawful firearm ownership while rigorously safeguarding the community. This requires a balanced assessment that considers both the applicant's stated needs and the potential risks to others. Question 14. What factors determine an applicant's eligibility for a Category H firearm license in Western Australia, particularly when considering their past behavior and proposed storage arrangements? Option A. The applicant's membership in a recognized shooting club and a general assurance that the firearm will be stored safely. Option B. The applicant's possession of a clean criminal record and a stated intention to use the firearm for a recognized recreational purpose. Option C. The applicant's ability to clearly articulate a genuine reason for possessing the firearm and provide detailed, compliant plans for its secure storage, supported by all necessary documentation. Option D. The applicant's past behavior, regardless of its relevance to firearms, and a simple declaration of intent to comply with storage laws. The correct answer is C. The applicant's ability to clearly articulate a genuine reason for possessing the firearm and provide detailed, compliant plans for its secure storage, supported by all necessary documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm license applicant to demonstrate not only a genuine reason for possessing a firearm, but also to satisfy the licensing authority that they can store it safely and securely, thereby mitigating potential risks to themselves and the public. The applicant's past behavior, even if not directly related to firearms, can be a relevant factor in assessing their overall suitability and the likelihood of responsible firearm ownership. The onus is on the applicant to provide sufficient evidence to overcome any doubts. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant proactively addressing any potential concerns regarding their suitability by providing comprehensive documentation that demonstrates their understanding of and commitment to safe firearm storage and handling, and by clearly articulating their genuine reason for needing the firearm. This includes submitting the required application forms, providing evidence of a genuine reason as defined by Western Australian legislation, e.g., sporting or target shooting, occupational requirements, and crucially, detailing their proposed secure storage arrangements that comply with the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations. This approach directly addresses the core requirements of the licensing authority, which are to ensure public safety and responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a clean criminal record is the sole determinant of eligibility, and to therefore provide only the basic application form without further detail on storage or genuine reason. This fails to meet the positive obligations under the Firearms Act 1979, WA, to demonstrate a genuine reason and to satisfy the Commissioner of Police that the applicant is a fit and proper person who will store the firearm safely. The Act requires more than just the absence of disqualifying factors. It demands positive evidence of suitability. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the intended use of the firearm, e.g., target shooting, and to neglect the critical aspect of secure storage. While a genuine reason is essential, the legislation places equal, if not greater, emphasis on the safe storage of firearms to prevent unauthorized access, theft, or misuse. Failing to adequately detail storage plans demonstrates a lack of understanding of the comprehensive safety requirements mandated by law. A further incorrect approach is to downplay or omit any information that might be perceived as negative, such as a history of mental health challenges or past instances of impulsive behavior, even if unrelated to firearms. While the application may not explicitly ask for such details, the licensing authority has a duty to assess the applicant's overall suitability. Withholding relevant information or failing to proactively address how such past issues have been managed and do not impact current firearm safety, can lead to the application being refused on the grounds that the applicant is not a fit and proper person. Professional reasoning. Professionals assessing firearm license applications in Western Australia must adopt a holistic approach. This involves meticulously reviewing the application against the requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its regulations. The decision-making process should center on whether the applicant has provided sufficient, credible evidence to satisfy the Commissioner of Police on all fronts: genuine reason, safe storage, and overall suitability as a responsible firearm owner. Where there are potential concerns, the applicant should be given the opportunity to address them, but the ultimate decision rests on whether the statutory requirements for public safety and responsible ownership have been demonstrably met. Question 15. Compliance review shows that an applicant for Category H firearm license in Western Australia has a reported history of domestic violence, although no charges were laid or convictions resulted from the incident. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Immediately refuse the firearm license based solely on the report of domestic violence without further inquiry. Option B. Dismiss the report of domestic violence as irrelevant to the firearm license application since no charges were filed. Option C. Grant the firearm license as no criminal conviction exists, assuming the applicant is suitable. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the reported domestic violence incident, seeking further information from relevant sources to assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk to public safety, in accordance with the Firearms Act 1979, WA. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the reported domestic violence incident, seeking further information from relevant sources to assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk to public safety, in accordance with the Firearms Act 1979. WA. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risk associated with firearms and the strict regulatory environment governing their possession and use in Western Australia. The applicant's history of domestic violence, even if not resulting in a conviction, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to hold a Category H firearm license, as it directly impacts the assessment of their propensity for violence and their ability to safely store and handle firearms. The licensing authority must balance the applicant's right to apply for a license with the paramount public safety imperative. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all relevant information is considered and that decisions are made in accordance with the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's suitability, giving significant weight to the reported domestic violence incident. This approach requires the licensing authority to actively seek further information from relevant sources, including police reports and potentially the applicant's former partner, to understand the nature and severity of the incident. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, mandates that a person is not eligible for a license if they are deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. A history of domestic violence, even without a conviction, strongly suggests a potential danger, necessitating a detailed investigation to determine if the applicant meets the criteria for license refusal under Section 11 of the Act, which covers persons of bad character or who are otherwise deemed unsuitable. This proactive and investigative approach ensures that public safety is prioritized and that the licensing decision is based on a comprehensive understanding of the applicant's risk profile. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the reported domestic violence incident solely because no charges were laid or a conviction was not secured. This fails to acknowledge that the Firearms Act 1979, WA, does not solely rely on convictions for license eligibility. The licensing authority has a duty to assess the applicant's overall suitability, and such incidents, even if not prosecuted, can be indicative of underlying issues that pose a risk. This approach is ethically flawed as it potentially overlooks critical safety concerns. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license without further investigation, assuming the absence of a conviction means the applicant is suitable. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for the potential risks associated with domestic violence. It contravenes the spirit and intent of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, by not adequately assessing the applicant's propensity for violence or their ability to safely handle firearms, thereby compromising public safety. A further incorrect approach would be to automatically refuse the license based solely on the report of domestic violence, without providing the applicant an opportunity to respond or present mitigating circumstances. While the report is serious, a fair and just process requires that the applicant be given a chance to address the allegations and provide context, in line with principles of procedural fairness. This approach could lead to an unfair refusal and potential legal challenge. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying potential risks based on application information and external reports. 2. Actively gathering all relevant information to fully understand the nature and extent of the risks. 3. Objectively assessing the information against the specific legislative requirements and criteria for license eligibility. 4. Considering the applicant's right to a fair process while upholding the paramount duty to public safety. 5. Documenting the entire decision-making process thoroughly. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a Western Australia Category H firearm license applicant has disclosed a history of domestic disputes with a former partner, although no criminal charges were ever laid. The applicant states these were minor disagreements that have been resolved. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the firearm license as no criminal convictions are present, and the applicant asserts the disputes were minor and resolved. Option B. Defer the decision indefinitely pending further, unspecified information, effectively delaying the application without a clear investigative path. Option C. Dismiss the information regarding domestic disputes as irrelevant to the firearm license application since no criminal charges were filed. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, seeking corroborating information, and assessing the applicant's current suitability based on all available evidence, including the disclosed disputes. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, seeking corroborating information, and assessing the applicant's current suitability based on all available evidence, including the disclosed disputes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of firearm licensing in Western Australia, where public safety and responsible firearm ownership are paramount. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal convictions, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to possess a firearm, as it could indicate a propensity for violence or an inability to manage conflict responsibly. Careful judgment is required to balance the applicant's right to apply for a license against the community's right to be protected from potential harm. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's entire history, paying particular attention to any information that might indicate a risk to themselves or others. This includes diligently investigating the details of the domestic disputes, seeking corroborating evidence where possible, and considering the applicant's current circumstances and any mitigating factors. The Firearms Act 1996, WA, and associated regulations mandate that the licensing authority must be satisfied that an applicant is a fit and proper person to hold a firearm license. This requires a comprehensive review of all relevant information, including any history of violence, disputes, or behavior that could compromise public safety. The licensing authority has a duty of care to the community, and a proactive, risk-averse stance is ethically and legally mandated when assessing suitability. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the domestic dispute information simply because no criminal charges were laid. This fails to acknowledge that a lack of criminal conviction does not equate to a lack of risk. The Firearms Act 1996, WA, does not limit the assessment of suitability solely to criminal convictions. It requires a broader evaluation of character and potential risk. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license based solely on the applicant's assertion that the disputes were minor or resolved, without independent verification or a deeper investigation into the nature and severity of these incidents. This would abdicate the licensing authority's responsibility to conduct a due diligence assessment. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay the decision indefinitely without a clear plan for further investigation, which could be seen as an avoidance of responsibility and could prejudice the applicant unnecessarily. Professionals in this field should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes thoroughness, objectivity, and adherence to legislative requirements. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant information and potential risk factors. 2. Conducting a comprehensive investigation into all flagged concerns, including seeking further documentation or interviews. 3. Objectively evaluating the gathered information against the criteria for a fit and proper person, as defined by the Firearms Act 1996 (WA). 4. Documenting the entire assessment process and the rationale for the final decision. 5. Considering the potential impact of the decision on public safety and the applicant's rights. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal that a Category H firearm license applicant in Western Australia has submitted an application that primarily focuses on their personal interest in firearms, without providing specific, verifiable evidence of a lawful genuine reason or detailed plans for secure storage and transport. Which approach best addresses the potential deficiencies in this application to ensure compliance with Western Australian firearm licensing requirements? Option A. The applicant should immediately supplement their application with detailed documentation proving their genuine reason, e.g., club membership, competition records, collection details, and comprehensive plans for firearm storage and transport that strictly adhere to the Firearms Act 1973 (WA) and its regulations. Option B. The applicant should request a waiver from providing detailed storage and transport plans, arguing that their personal interest is sufficient justification for the license. Option C. The applicant should focus on highlighting their clean criminal record and their perceived responsible nature, assuming this will outweigh the lack of specific genuine reason evidence. Option D. The applicant should submit a brief addendum stating their strong personal desire to own a firearm and their general intention to store it safely. The correct answer is A. The applicant should immediately supplement their application with detailed documentation proving their genuine reason, e.g., club membership, competition records, collection details, and comprehensive plans for firearm storage and transport that strictly adhere to the Firearms Act 1973 (WA) and its regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firearm license applicant to demonstrate not only a genuine reason for possessing a firearm, but also to provide evidence that addresses potential public safety concerns. The onus is on the applicant to satisfy the licensing authority, and failure to adequately address these aspects can lead to license refusal. The complexity arises from balancing the applicant's rights with the community's safety, necessitating a thorough and transparent approach from the applicant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant proactively and comprehensively addressing all potential concerns regarding their genuine reason and suitability for a Category H firearm license in Western Australia. This means providing detailed, verifiable documentation that clearly outlines the specific purpose for the firearm, e.g., competitive shooting, collecting with a specific focus, including evidence of membership in an approved club, participation records, and a clear explanation of how the firearm will be stored and transported in accordance with the Firearms Act 1973 (WA) and associated regulations. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible firearm ownership and compliance with all legal requirements, directly satisfying the licensing authority's need for assurance regarding public safety and the legitimacy of the applicant's stated reason. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing only a general statement of intent without supporting documentation fails to meet the evidentiary burden required by the Firearms Act 1973 (WA). The licensing authority needs concrete proof, not mere assertions, to assess the genuine reason and public safety implications. This approach risks being perceived as insufficient and lacking in seriousness. Submitting incomplete application forms or omitting sections related to storage and transport directly contravenes the administrative requirements of the licensing process under Western Australian law. This demonstrates a lack of attention to detail and a potential disregard for safety protocols, which are paramount for license approval. Focusing solely on the applicant's personal desire to own a firearm without demonstrating a specific, lawful, and verifiable genuine reason, as defined by the Firearms Act 1973 (WA), is a fundamental flaw. The law requires a demonstrable purpose beyond personal preference, and failing to articulate and evidence this purpose will inevitably lead to refusal. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and evidence-based approach. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific legislative requirements of the relevant jurisdiction, in this case, Western Australia's Firearms Act 1973 and associated regulations, anticipating potential concerns of the licensing authority, and meticulously gathering and presenting all necessary documentation. A structured approach, ensuring all application components are complete, accurate, and supported by verifiable evidence, is crucial for successful outcomes and upholding public safety standards. Question 18. Quality control measures reveal that an applicant for Category H firearm license in Western Australia has submitted an application that includes a general statement about keeping firearms safe, but lacks specific details regarding the type of safe, its installation, and the separate storage of ammunition. Considering the requirements of the Firearms Act 1973, which of the following approaches best demonstrates the applicant's understanding and commitment to safe firearm ownership? Option A. Submitting a photograph of the proposed storage area without specific details about the safe or ammunition storage. Option B. Mentioning that neighbors are also licensed firearm owners and that firearms will be kept out of sight when not in use. Option C. Providing detailed specifications of an Australian standards-compliant firearm safe, its proposed installation location away from children's access, and a clear plan for the separate secure storage of ammunition. Option D. Stating that firearms will be stored securely, and that the applicant will consult with a licensed firearm dealer for advice on safe storage practices. The correct answer is C. Providing detailed specifications of an Australian standards-compliant firearm safe, its proposed installation location away from children's access, and a clear plan for the separate secure storage of ammunition. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the specific requirements for obtaining a Category H firearm license in Western Australia, particularly concerning the safe storage of firearms. The applicant's personal circumstances, including the presence of children and the proximity of other firearm owners, introduce a layer of complexity that necessitates careful consideration of safety and compliance with the Firearms Act 1973, and its associated regulations. The onus is on the applicant to prove they can meet these stringent safety standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant proactively and comprehensively addressing all stipulated safe storage requirements as outlined in the Firearms Act 1973, and relevant regulations. This includes providing detailed plans for a secure firearm safe that meets Australian standards as /NZS 4011, 1997 or subsequent revisions, demonstrating its installation in a location that is not readily accessible to children, and detailing the secure storage of ammunition separately from firearms. This approach directly demonstrates the applicant's commitment to fulfilling their legal obligations and prioritizing safety, which is the fundamental basis for license approval. It shows foresight and a genuine understanding of the responsibilities associated with firearm ownership in Western Australia. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the applicant providing a vague assurance that firearms will be stored safely without detailing the specific measures or the type of safe to be used. This fails to meet the evidentiary requirements of the Firearms Act 1973, which mandates demonstrable proof of compliance with safe storage regulations. It leaves too much to interpretation and does not provide the licensing authority with the necessary confidence that safety standards will be met. Another incorrect approach is to only focus on storing firearms securely while neglecting the separate and equally important requirement for the secure storage of ammunition. The Firearms Act 1973, specifically addresses ammunition storage, and its omission from the applicant's plan indicates an incomplete understanding of the legal obligations, potentially compromising safety. A further incorrect approach is to assume that the presence of other licensed firearm owners in the vicinity negates the need for stringent personal safe storage measures. While community awareness can be beneficial, the primary responsibility for safe storage rests with the individual license holder. Relying on others' compliance does not absolve the applicant of their own legal duties under Western Australian law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and meticulous approach to license applications. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific legislative requirements of the relevant jurisdiction. In this case, Western Australia's Firearms Act 1973 and associated regulations. Applicants should anticipate the information the licensing authority will require and provide it comprehensively and clearly. This includes detailed documentation of safe storage plans, adherence to Australian standards for firearm safes, and separate secure storage of ammunition. A professional approach prioritizes demonstrable compliance and safety over assumptions or vague assurances, ensuring all legal obligations are met and fostering public trust in responsible firearm ownership. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal that an applicant for Category H firearm license in Western Australia has proposed storing their firearm in a locked, freestanding gun safe located in their home office, with ammunition stored separately in a locked ammunition box within the same room. Based on the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations, which of the following proposed storage methods best demonstrates compliance and professional judgment? Option A. Storing the Category H firearm in a locked gun safe that is securely bolted to the floor or wall of the premises, with ammunition stored separately in a locked container. Option B. Storing the Category H firearm in a locked drawer within a desk located in the applicant's home office. Option C. Storing the Category H firearm and its ammunition together in a locked safe that is bolted to the structure of the premises. Option D. Storing the Category H firearm in a locked, freestanding gun safe that is not bolted to the structure of the premises, with ammunition stored separately in a locked container. The correct answer is A. Storing the Category H firearm in a locked gun safe that is securely bolted to the floor or wall of the premises, with ammunition stored separately in a locked container. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the specific storage requirements for different firearm categories under Western Australian law, particularly concerning Category H firearms which have unique security obligations. Failure to correctly identify these requirements can lead to an unsafe storage situation, contravening the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations, and potentially jeopardizing public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. The applicant must balance the need for secure storage with practical consideration, all within the strict legal framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves accurately identifying the specific storage requirements mandated by the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and the relevant regulations for Category H firearms. This means understanding that Category H firearms, due to their nature, e.g., handguns, often require a higher level of security than other categories. This typically involves storage in a locked container that is bolted to the structure of the premises, separate from ammunition, and in a location that is not readily accessible. This approach directly aligns with the legislative intent to prevent unauthorized access and misuse, ensuring compliance with Section 24 of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and the associated storage regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Storing a Category H firearm in a standard locked cabinet that is not bolted to the structure of the premises is a regulatory failure. While the cabinet is locked, the lack of secure anchoring means it could potentially be removed or forced open more easily, failing to meet the heightened security expectations for this firearm category under Western Australian law. Storing a Category H firearm and its ammunition together in a locked safe, even if the safe is bolted, is a significant regulatory failure. The Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its regulations explicitly mandate the separation of firearms and ammunition to mitigate risks. Storing a Category H firearm in a locked drawer within a desk, even if the desk is in a private residence, is a critical regulatory failure. This method of storage does not meet the minimum security standards required for any firearm, let alone a Category H, and presents a severe risk of unauthorized access. Professional reasoning. Professionals assessing firearm license applications must adopt a systematic approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly reviewing the applicant's proposed storage arrangements against the specific requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its regulations for the declared firearm category. 2. prioritizing safety and compliance above all else, ensuring that proposed storage methods demonstrably prevent unauthorized access and comply with all legal mandates. 3. Seeking clarification or further information from the applicant if any aspect of their proposal is unclear or appears non-compliant. 4. Understanding the rationale behind the regulations, which is to minimize the risk of firearms falling into the wrong hands. Question 20. Benchmark analysis indicates a Western Australian applicant for Category H firearm license intends to possess a handgun for competitive shooting and a further 2 handguns for collection purposes. The applicant currently owns 1 handgun for competitive shooting. Regulations stipulate that a license holder must ensure firearms are stored in a manner that prevents unauthorized access. The number of firearms stored must be consistent with the license conditions and the applicant's demonstrated need. If the applicant anticipates acquiring 1 additional handgun for collection within the next 2 years, what is the minimum secure storage capacity, expressed as a number of handguns, that the applicant should demonstrate to the Western Australian Police Force Firearms Branch to comply with the Firearms Act 1979? WA. Option A, 1 handgun. Option B, 3 handguns. Option C, 2 handguns. Option D, 4 handguns. The correct answer is D, 4 handguns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the required storage capacity for firearms based on projected usage and regulatory limits in Western Australia. Miscalculation can lead to non-compliance with the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and its associated regulations, potentially resulting in penalties, license suspension, or refusal of renewal. The professional must balance practical storage needs with legal requirements, ensuring safety and responsible firearm management. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the maximum number of firearms likely to be stored at any given time, considering the applicant's stated intended use and any potential for future acquisition within the license category. This approach directly addresses the core requirement of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, concerning the safe and secure storage of firearms, ensuring that the licensed storage facility meets the prescribed standards for the number and type of firearms intended for possession. Specifically, Section 17 of the Firearms Act 1979, WA mandates that a license holder must ensure firearms are stored in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, and the number of firearms stored must be consistent with the license conditions and the applicant's demonstrated need. By projecting the maximum likely storage, the applicant demonstrates foresight and adherence to the spirit of responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply use the current number of firearms owned, without considering potential future acquisitions or the maximum capacity allowed by the license category. This fails to meet the forward-looking nature of licensing requirements, which aim to ensure adequate and compliant storage for the full scope of the license. It could lead to a situation where the applicant later acquires more firearms and finds their existing storage is insufficient or non-compliant, necessitating costly upgrades or facing regulatory action. Another incorrect approach is to overestimate the storage capacity significantly beyond any reasonable projection of firearm acquisition. While appearing to err on the side of caution, this can raise questions during the licensing process about the applicant's genuine need for such extensive storage, and could be perceived as an attempt to circumvent the spirit of the regulations, which are designed to ensure appropriate and proportionate storage solutions. It may also lead to unnecessary expense for the applicant. A further incorrect approach is to base the calculation solely on the minimum storage requirements stipulated by regulations, without considering the applicant's specific intended use and the potential for multiple firearms of the same category. This overlooks the practical realities of firearm ownership and the need for secure storage that accommodates the actual number and types of firearms the applicant intends to possess, not just the bare minimum. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to impact assessment for firearm license applications. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements of the Firearms Act 1979, WA, and associated regulations regarding storage capacity and security. 2. Thoroughly assessing the applicant's stated intended use and projected firearm acquisition plans. 3. Calculating the maximum plausible number of firearms to be stored, ensuring this aligns with the license category and any specific conditions. 4. Documenting the rationale for the storage capacity calculation, demonstrating compliance and responsible planning. 5. Consulting with the applicant to ensure their understanding of the storage requirements and their ability to meet them.